Kia ora, I'm Wendy from Autism Wairarapa Charitable Trust, one of the support coordinators.
And hi, my name's Tracey. I'm from Autism Wairarapa Charitable Trust and one of the support coordinators. We're going to be talking about autism today, and when looking for somebody on the autistic spectrum, what that may look like. So autism is sometimes called ASD, which is autistic spectrum disorder. So sometimes we will be talking about autism with autism or ASD. Some tips to finding them.
So with autism, it's a neurological disorder which affects three main areas. And so for people who are on the spectrum, whether they're a child or an adult, they may not necessarily look any different to you or I, but they have a neurological disorder, which means that their brain thinks differently. And so it affects three main areas: the social, the communication, and the thinking.
This is normally displayed through sensory issues. So sensory issues are normally, touch, sight, hearing, but it can affect people in different ways. So if I give you an analogy of what that might feel like for somebody, that could be if you close your eyes, and I'm going to take you through this little trip where you are going up the Sky Tower, up a lift, going up many, many stories, and you get to the top of the tower and the elevator doors open. You walk through onto a ledge and there's no railings there. You slide yourself across the side of the building and you stand there feeling the wind on your face, and then suddenly somebody touches you. That feeling is what people with sensory issues often feel. So that anticipation of the fear of what could happen is out of their control, and it just comes from nowhere, and that can heighten their anxiety, which when you are in that anxious state, your mind is not working as it normally would do. So you would go into that fight, flight or freeze stage. So with that, if say you are lost and you are in that very anxious state, somebody could be calling your name and you could be freezing, or you could fight them if they come near you, or they could run away.
Oh, that's great, thank you. And so that's another tip, I guess, just to be mindful of, is that when we are looking for a young person or a person with ASD, is that the fact is that you can get different responses. So one person you meet with ASD is not necessarily going to be like someone else you've met with ASD, and so you've got to be very mindful of that. Their responses could be different. You might get somebody who is non-verbal, you might get somebody who is yelling, you could get somebody who is sitting there in the fetal position rocking, and so it's just, how do we respond to those things? What are some strategies and some practical ways that you can respond to people who respond differently to you? So for instance, with someone who's non-verbal, doesn't necessarily mean that they can't hear what you're saying. Obviously, it's talking around, they're needing lots of reassurance, and so it will be explaining who you are and that you're going to take them back to mum or dad, and the steps of what you're going to do next. And that's another thing with ASD, is that these young people like to have routine. They like to know ahead of time what's happening, and so it's really important that you're explaining what you're doing. Oh, I'm going to take you to the car. Mum's waiting for you at the police station or at home, So it's thinking about some of those things of what you're going to say, just to make that calmness happen and that reassurance for the person. Because remember, their anxiety is sky high.
Another thing you should be looking for is when the call comes in, you need to find out as much information about that person as you can. Now, normally somebody who's on the spectrum will have an interest. So finding out what that interest is, whether that be the most classic, Thomas the Tank Engine, or it might be about horses, or it might be about Doctor Who or Star Wars. Talk about those things with them, because then you're starting that relationship with them that will make them feel comfortable with you if you're going to be assisting them.
That's right. And if you get that conversation going of the interest, then you'll get them talking. You know, they want to share and explain everything they know about their interest. So yeah, that's a great tip.
That's just able to get them into a position where you'll be able to slowly get them out of that fight, flight or freeze zone. Yeah, so I mean, it's, if I can get anything across, it would be to make yourself as relatable as possible, keeping a calm voice, but also, as Wendy said, preempting what's going to happen. So if you're going to be approaching them, you know, we're just coming in a bit closer so we can see if you're okay, so that they're not going to be afraid of what could be coming their way.
Now, finding that information, it's really vital, getting that background information from the parent of what the child is like. You know, do they like to be touched? How do they like to be talked to? Is, you know, calling their name necessarily isn't going to get a response. But maybe talking about Thomas the Tank Engine, or a cartoon character that they're really interested in, might be something that they would be, you know, could relate to and will get a response.
And if you find a person that's on the autistic spectrum and you're not getting any response from them, that might be their normal way of communicating. So a lot of people on the spectrum won't give information if they don't feel like you're a safe person to talk to. So you could be talking to them and not knowing, asking them what their name is, and they might not say what their name is, or they might not be looking at you. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them, it's just how they communicate. So that's something that you should be aware of.
And I think too, as a responder, how do you look? You know, are you wearing high vis? You know, do you have a hat on? Because some of these things can be quite distracting for a person with ASD. And so maybe, again, picking up on some of those interests that they have, that might help you find them as well, or just to help engage with them when you find them. So, and even maybe having some things that might attract them to be able to engage with you. Remembering with autism, it's very difficult for them to communicate and have that social interaction. They find it really difficult to read situations. So an example would be, when I'm talking to you, I would know that you're listening by, you nod your head, you're making eye contact. With someone with ASD, that doesn't come naturally. It's just those things that are really helpful to be mindful of. But with these are some of our sensory toys that we might use with some of our young children, and these are just good little distractions, because it's taking the attention away from them directly, but it's helping to engage with them as well. And so yeah, maybe this could be an idea where the SARS team have a sensory pack of different things that could be, you know, attractive towards a child particularly. Another tip that's really helpful is that people with ASD, their brains are wired differently, and so their thinking is different to other people. And so what we find is that when you ask a question, a good tip is that you count to 10 in your head before you get a response. Now that's because they are thinking about what they're going to say, and so they need that processing time to think about their response to you. So
in conclusion, we're going to share some tips that you could be using when you initially go for the search.
So the first thing is to find out as much information you can that's going to help engage the interest of the child or young person you're looking for.
So that as soon as you've got that engagement, you can relate to the person who's on the spectrum. It will make it easier and make them feel more comfortable, because the next thing we're going to mention is that anxiety. So with that anxiety, you just need to be aware of where that might be. They might be in the freeze mode, the flight mode, or the flee mode.
Maybe having some sensory toys and things that will help with distraction, something that will take their mind off the attention off them, and so something again that you can engage with the person.
Now, the next tip I'm going to suggest is when you're dealing with a person who's on the spectrum, that you're giving them as much information as you can before you do anything. So it might be, we're going to be approaching you slowly around this corner. So-and-so is going to be asking you what your name is, so that they know what's coming before it actually comes. That will put them in a position where they feel a lot more comfortable about working with you.
Mm. And when asking a question, it would be good if you can count to 10 in your head, so that you have that time to get the response. Because remembering that someone with ASD needs to have that processing time to form a response to whoever they need to respond to. So another tip is that when you're approaching someone with ASD is, just being aware of the space around the person. And so if you can imagine a bubble around Tracey, for instance, I'm not going to go right up to her. We're just mindful of how much space, because that's encroaching on their personal space, but even more so with someone with ASD.
And another thing that you definitely shouldn't be doing is treating somebody who's on the spectrum as someone who is dumb. So even though they might not be talking to you, that doesn't mean that they're not listening to you or taking in what you're saying.
When a responder is looking for someone, like what they are wearing, and like, is their voice loud? Because, some people respond differently to loud and quiet as well, and so it's just being mindful of how loud you are, the tone of your voice, your body language, that sort of thing. And
hopefully you've got all that information already from the parents or the caregiver. So they're
going to know that little Johnny doesn't like to be touched,
He's
going to freak out if you So we really appreciate the Wander Search initiative. And, we know that our community, particularly the families that we work with, just having that reassurance that they've got a pendant on their child who, potentially could run off or get lost.
It's that peace of mind is priceless.
So thank you.
We'd like to thank Lansar for giving us this opportunity to put this bit together for our people.